The snow crusted overnight and made a brittle skin over the coulees along the Marias. Before dawn, the soldiers rode with scarves pulled tight, breath steaming in ropes that hung low over the horses. They halted on a ridge above a cluster of lodges in the cottonwoods, a winter camp pressed to the riverbank where ice groaned in the current. The scouts pointed down slope and told Major Eugene Baker that Mountain Chief's band lay below. A black seam of smoke rose from banked fires. Dogs nosed the drifts and circled. Somewhere in the half-light, a kettle lid clinked and a child coughed. It was January 23, 1870. Baker's column held 4 companies of the 2nd U.S. Cavalry and a mounted detachment of the 13th Infantry. They had left Fort Ellis, stopped at Fort Shaw for more men and for the scouts who knew the country, Joe Kipp and Joseph Coble, and rode north with orders that filtered down from General Philip Sheridan through Colonel Philippe Régis de Trobriand. Find Mountain Chief and strike him hard. Winter had already punished the Blackfeet with smallpox and hunger. A blow now would finish what the season had started. From the ridge, the lodges looked like dark humps in snow. Kip studied the painted poles and the way the teepees stood, and told Baker this was not Mountain Chief's camp. He said it belonged to Heavy Runner, a chief deemed friendly by the agency, a man who carried a paper promising protection. Coble disagreed. When Kip tried to ride forward to warn the sleepers, a sergeant leveled a carbine across his path, and Baker told him to hold his place. The line steadied. The troopers raised their rifles and waited for the command. The first volleys punched through lodge covers and into bodies still under robes. Women stumbled into the cold with babies pressed to their chests. Elders tried to wave surrender and fell where the drift had hardened. Dogs barked and went quiet. Heavy Runner ran uphill with his paper held high, shouting his name so the soldiers would know him, and dropped with the sheet still crumpled in his fist. When the fire slackened, the troopers went through the camp with knives and revolvers, cutting openings, kicking embers, dragging covers down to smother the wounded. Shots echoed off cottonwood trunks, and the river ice cracked as if it were answering. The tallies that survive disagree, but the lowest number is a massacre. Baker reported 173 dead. Blackfeet accounts put it nearer to 217. Smallpox had already thinned the camp. Many men who could have fought were out hunting meat. Spearwoman, 6 years old, remembered the dogs and the crack of rifles rolling down the ridge. She hid behind a bed backrest and watched a blade slit the canvas and the nose of a gun push through the hole. Long Time, calf, 8, carried an infant across ice-choked water and did not stop until her legs went numb. Barehead returned from catching horses and saw lodge roofs pressed into fire while his family lay beneath them. He counted until numbers lost their shape. By noon, the shooting ended. Baker's men took horses, robes, and whatever stores of food they could use, then burned the rest. The column marched away without turning toward Mountain Chief. The attack had not struck the band named in the orders. It had struck the nearest people at hand and left a stain of ash along the river corridor. News ran north by word of mouth and south by telegraph. In Helena and Washington, the language that framed the morning hardened. De Trobriand reported that the murderers and marauders of the summer had been chastised. Sheridan forwarded praise to General Sherman and congratulated the citizens of Montana. Baker's paperwork listed enemy killed, horses seized, women and children released. There was no court-martial and no formal censure. The only penalties that winter were carried by those who had stood sleeping when the rifles came. Inside Blackfeet lodges, the story was told another way. Survivors said the soldiers fired without warning into a camp protected by a chief's name. They said children and elders died where they lay, and that some who could not run were burned alive when the covers were cut and pushed into the flames. They said the scouts knew whose camp it was and that the warnings were ignored. Joe Kipp later said he tried to stop the attack and was threatened with arrest. Cobell boasted that he shot Heavy Runner. Between the neat lines in official ink and the voices in the lodges ran a gap wide enough to swallow the river. The massacre did what winters and epidemics had already started. Families left the river bottoms and drew close to the agencies, closer to rations, and the rooms where paperwork decided who ate. For a brief time, the East paid attention. A congressman said civilization shuddered. Papers in the territory mocked the outrage and praised Baker's vigor. Then the story thinned into columns and dates. The reservation map shrank. The rolls lengthened. Mothers taught their children to keep to the willows along the banks because brush might hide them if riders came again. It is tempting to file the Marias beside the Washita and the burnings in the Powder River country and to see it as one more step on the road that led toward the Little Bighorn in 1876. Yet this morning sits apart. It was a winter attack on a sick camp under a promise of protection, ordered in a season when hunger had already done its work. The label changed with the years. Baker Massacre, Marias Massacre, Bear River by Blackfeet memory. But the place did not. A bend of river, a line of cottonwoods, a slope where men once lay down behind rifles and shot into sleep. For decades, official histories softened the edges. Engagement, not massacre. Fight, not murder. In the Blackfeet community, the words did not shift. On anniversaries, people came to speak names and lay stones. Elders walked visitors along the ridges where the skirmish lines stood and pointed to the willow thickets where the living hid and waited. Teachers told children that a paper promising protection is only as strong as the man who chooses to honor it. In time, a memorial stood on the site, but the work of naming never ended. Follow the lines outward and you see what else changed. Heavy Runner's band was broken. Mountain Chief led people north into Canada. Traders and agents learned again how fear could move a nation. The army wrote its report and turned to the next problem on the plains. The Blackfeet carried the winter into their homes and taught their children how to live with a story that did not end. That, too, became part of the record, even when the official books looked away. The clearest way to understand the morning is to go back to first light and watch the choices stack. Men on horses breathing steam. A friendly chief walking uphill with a paper and trust in the signatures on it. A scout warning his commander and being told it made no difference which band slept below. A volley running down a line of rifles and into canvas and sleep. The rest, the editorials, the official phrases, the shifts in blame, came later, after the smoke drifted low along the river corridor. Stand there now, where the cottonwoods crowd the bends, and winter still talks in the grass when the wind comes over the ridges. The road lies close, ranch fences lean, and the evening air smells of wood smoke when weather turns. There is no monument big enough to hold what happened in a few hours on a January morning, but the truth remains. The soldiers rode in at dawn. The people in the lodges woke to gunfire. A chief holding a paper fell before anyone said his name. The river moved on under ice and carried memory beyond the bend. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.